So our final speaker is providing something different for us today. This is Meiron Lees. Meiron is an author and trainer and speaker, and he's going to be talking to us about something different but equally important, perhaps a little under-recognised, and that's about behavioural change, resilience, dealing with stress and coping mechanisms. So it's a pleasure to welcome Meiron, who's going to be talking to us in a couple of seconds. Thank you. Thanks, Meiron.
My name is Meiron Lees. I was diagnosed with diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, and I'm about 18 months post-treatment. The irony of my story is that I wrote a book called De-Stress, Building Resilience in Challenging Times, and 2 years after I published that book, I received a diagnosis. So I thought of myself, best I go and read that book again and see if it really works in challenging times. However, I would like to share with you a couple of thoughts and ideas with the hope that they somehow make a difference in your world, as they certainly did in mine. So I'd like to ask you a question. Does life sometimes feel similar to this? And hopefully we have some, there you go. I'm not so sure if these slides are actually working. Let's give it a go. Maybe not. Well, that's okay. We'll just navigate around that. When I did some research about the mind and how the mind plays a part in the stresses that we have, specifically resulting to the illness what we're going to speak about today, it amazed me that we have about 60,000 thoughts every single day. And when I saw that statistic, I was quite blown away. Wow, 60,000 thoughts a day. And in fact, for the analytics among us, that's about a thought a second. So we have about a thought a second. 90% of the thoughts that we think are the same. So if you're wondering what you're thinking today, 90% of what you're thinking you thought yesterday, which basically means tomorrow you're going to be thinking most of the thoughts that you actually thought today. And that might be, okay, so that's our statistic, but so what? The so what part is that out of those 60,000 thoughts, about 45,000 of them are negative. And in fact, if someone says to you, have a nice day, what we should be doing is sitting them down and saying, well, you know what, the truth be told, I've got to contend with 45,000 negative thoughts until I'm zero. Then we can start on the positive one. So, of course, we have a challenge, and we all aren't jumping like Tom Cruise on Oprah's couch on a Monday morning. So it goes to show that the mind actually will start defaulting automatically to the bottom picture rather than the top picture. So the mind, if you leave it alone, will most often, because it's going to default to those 45,000 negative thoughts, will go towards pessimism rather than optimism. I'd like to share with you how this all works and what our operating system is about. It all starts with the stimulus, and I think a lot of us can appreciate when we're going for our checkups. Mine was a couple of months ago, and either you're going to go and see your hematologist for the result, or perhaps you might get a call giving you your results. That can be a fairly stressful event. And then, of course, we have a response. And we have various responses from that stimulus. So one can feel, oh, not this again, and we can kind of dread the day and count down to those days where we're getting results. Or indeed, we can kind of feel quite anxious about it, or a little bit pensive about it. The question begs around stimulus and response, where is the stimulus responsible for our responses? So, for example, if I turned around to you and I saw you being really anxious about getting a result, and I said to you, hey, why are you feeling anxious? You say, Meiron, don't be silly. I'm actually just about to go and get my results and see what my LDH levels are like. Of course, that's what's going to make me feel stressed. But if that's the case, it begs the question, then we should all have similar responses to the same stimulus. The question I have for you then is really what differentiates us. What actually makes one person respond differently to the same event than does another? And the answer to that is the way that we think. Our thoughts are called in the main sponsoring thoughts, because our thoughts sponsor the way that we actually feel. So if you're feeling something, you're normally having a thought that precedes that feeling. So in fact, it's our thoughts that are already responsible for us feeling good or us feeling lousy. To that end, so we're going to get our results, and we start having what I call thought attacks. That's really when the brain turns on itself and attacks the possibility of a positive outcome. And of course, those lousy thoughts will create lousy feelings. What's important, and this is the first point of today, to recognize it's mainly those lousy thoughts that are causing us to feel the emotion of feeling stressed or anxious or fearful or depressed more than the situation itself. And in fact, what happens to these thought attacks, and I call it the monkey mind, we don't normally have one standalone negative thought. Have you ever thought about any times you're having some negative thinking? It's not just one thought and it dissipates. Normally, the monkeys like to call their brothers and their sisters and their cousins, and before you know it, you have the whole community of monkeys running rampant in your head. No wonder it's difficult for us to move out of a state of fear or negativity. In fact, I was reminded about this on the weekend. A friend of mine went to go and feed her dog at her home. She was running around shopping, and she went back to feed her dog, and the dog wasn't there. The dog escaped. And she spent 5 hours feeling absolutely anxious, picturing this dog being actually flattened by some car. It was a tiny little dog. And she was fretting the whole day, thinking of the worst scenario. And it was very difficult for her to move from that position to say, hey, my dog is okay. I'm sure somebody picked it up and took it to the vet, and it's got a little collar with a disc with with her mobile number. Furthermore, it's also got a little chip in the dog where it can get scanned by a veterinarian, and hopefully that all should be okay. Turned out that she was fretting for 5 hours while the dog was at the vet. Somebody picked the dog up and was happily playing along. So the monkeys are very powerful because they can certainly create a lot of distress for us. So if we have lymphoma, I've spoken to so many people that have lymphoma and wondered about how they're feeling and what these monkeys can be saying. And some of the things that I've heard is, why is life so unfair? What have I done to deserve this? I'll never get through this illness, or I must be a bad person. And these are the kind of thoughts that the monkeys can have. And of course, they're going to be churning out some of those negative feelings. The key about my talk today is, how do we transform those monkeys? How do we transform the negative thinking, which is so pervasive? There's two people that I'd like to talk about. Of course, you've heard my accent. Yes, I am from South Africa. No, I'm not too arrogant, so we can all be friends. The fact remains is that Nelson Mandela, who is a key figure in my life, it always has been, being a South African, I remember, he said two things. When he was incarcerated, he said, you can incarcerate my body, but you cannot incarcerate my mind. He also said when he was released, and I remember that day so clearly, as I walked out the door toward my freedom, I knew that if I didn't leave all the anger, hatred, and bitterness behind, I would still be in prison. And the same with us. I think the first point as well is that, yes, things are happening to our body. You know, whether you're a patient here or a carer, we've all been touched by lymphoma in a very deep and meaningful way. And it's a very emotional journey. I think what's important for us to understand that there is a part of us that's free from that, if we allow it to be. And to not entrap our thoughts, or not to entrap our emotions to the ravages of what lymphoma can do. And that's an art and that's a skill. And in fact, Nelson Mandela, one of the reasons why he's so respected, is had an uncanny ability to be incarcerated for 27 years. I can't even imagine what that must be like. And in fact, I went to go and visit his cell in Robben Island when they opened it to the tourists. And at that stage, his cellmate was the tour guide. And I spent a lot of time talking to him. And you saw what the conditions were, and the limestone quarries, and that's why Nelson Mandela's eyes are so poor, because there was no protection for his eyes, and the reflection of those limestones resulted in him having terrible eyesight. But thinking about that, thinking about how somebody has the ability to not feel in prison, even though physically he was in prison. And I think that's unbelievable. And another gentleman who was a psychiatrist who was in the concentration camps by the man called Dr. Viktor Frankl, he said this: everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So indeed, we all have a choice. No matter what the stresses that you're facing at the moment, you still have a choice of how you'd like to think and how you want to feel. The first point is, do I want to feel stressed or do I want to feel more calm? If you decide that you'd like to feel more calm, there is a way to do it. The first point is to try and separate yourself from the situation that you're in. Try and separate part of you. Because there's an existential question that begs here, and that is, do I have lymphoma or does my body have lymphoma? And you might think, well, that might be the same thing. But the fact that you're actually saying that there is me and there's my lymphoma, automatically there's a duality. Right? I have lymphoma, so there's me, the one that has lymphoma. So equally, that there is a part of us which is witnessing what's happening to us. And it's that part that we can tap into. Part of the way that we can do that is to start thinking in a different way. I'm going to share with you a technique that I use in my workshops. It's actually in my book as well. And it's how we measure and how we try to actually manage the thought attacks in these monkeys. I'd like to share with you what I call the red card technique. The red card technique is this. You've ever seen a referee on a pitch hold out a red card? What does that mean? Somebody's done a fairly damaging act, in fact, so much so that you need to leave the field. So too can our thought attacks damage our possibility of a positive outcome and can breed pessimism when those monkeys start taking over. The first point on the card is this: my negative thoughts are harmful to me. There certainly will be, because as we've expressed a little bit earlier, they're going to start sponsoring some negative emotions. The second point on the card is this: I can choose different thoughts. What's so important, and this is really the last of the human freedoms, is for us to choose the thoughts that we want to think that's going to support us rather than the alternative. Understanding that you have a choice of how you want to think about whatever situation, whatever challenge you're in right now. And the last point on the card is a question, and that is this: how else can I interpret the situation? I remember using the red card myself when I went through my lymphoma journey. And I took out the red card from my book and I showed it to myself when my thought attacks started to arrive. And I thought to myself, well, what possible benefit can be in this? This sucks, man. This is, chemotherapy is not a very pleasant, we don't want to put it on top of our to-do list in a hurry. And the fact remains is that we need to open up a different pathway in our mind to try and find what possible benefit can there be in this. I thought to myself, personally and professionally, there needs to be, and there will be, and there is, a benefit. Personally now, when it's raining, we've had a couple of cold days of late, in Sydney that is. I don't know, Melbourne's have its ravages as well. But when someone says to me now, it's raining and it's cold, that's a miserable day, I think we all kind of understand what a real miserable day is about. That for me is not a miserable day anymore. I think the fact that we have energy is such a gift. I've never really appreciated the gift of energy. Everyone's going through chemotherapy, we can hardly move off the bed, and we just, feel nauseous all day. We really understand what energy is about. I think we can all appreciate the sentiment. And really just the things that I was taking for granted before, I don't take for granted anymore. So personally, certainly, it's made me a better person. I don't sweat the small stuff as much as I used to. Professionally, I thought of myself when I get over this, perhaps it's worthwhile sharing the experience. I'm 70% through my second book, and really wanting to dedicate my time to sharing some of the techniques. I'm now working with the Cancer Council on some resilience programs for cancer patients, because I think one thing that, I don't know how you felt, but the way my experience is that even though my treatment was fantastic, and I am forever grateful to all the doctors and RCHOP, which I had. It saved my life, there's no doubt about that. But there was one thing missing, and that was, how do I manage, how does one deal with the ravages, the stress? How does one build resilience? And I really think that there's a massive, massive gap in the care market in this particular field. And it is my passion to make some inroads because the disease is hard enough, and trying to manage our own mind and our own stresses is very difficult. And I think that often we see, and this is not to the exclusion of the esteemed colleagues over here today, is that often doctors, they treat the illness and not the patient often. And I think that's a problem. And I don't know, I'm sure if we did a show of hands, which we won't do, how much we feel supported in the stress and resilience. And I think there's a certain gap in that. I'd like for you to consider for a moment now, what perhaps right now, I'd like you to think about what your number one stressor is. Right now, what is on your mind? What's keeping you awake at night? And what I'd like you to do is, for just a couple of moments, I'd like you to share, if you're comfortable. If it's not your number one stressor, because that's way too personal, then choose your number 2 or choose your number 3 stressor. And if you're not feeling really good about that stressor, talk to the person next to you about, hey, I've got this stressor and it really sucks and I'm not really enjoying it. I want you to hear the monkey stuff. You don't have to scream it, that I can hear it from here. But I'd like you to talk about some of the monkeys that are coming forward for you in terms of having some of the thought attacks. And then I'd like you to change your thinking and changing your articulation from the monkeys and answer the third question on the card, which is, how else can I interpret the situation? How else can I look at this in a way that perhaps could serve me, that there could be a benefit or an opportunity in that? We're just going to do it very, very briefly so you can get a little bit of a feel for how the monkeys play out and how there actually is an alternative. So turn to the person next to you and just have a very brief conversation and then swap. Okay. I hope that you have managed to find a little bit of a new interpretation. And a lot of people for the first time find this exercise really difficult because we absolutely become, as we know, we repeat the same things over and over. 90% of our thoughts are the same. So it's difficult to try and find a new neural pathway. But essentially, that the more you actually practice doing this, and the more you practice talking about perhaps some of the positives that come out of it. I've had people that have reported to me how closer they are to their families, and how people that they haven't even seen for years have come forward, have offered support and help. And I think a lot of things come out of this for us, things that we least expect to happens. And I'm sure we've all got different stories about how wonderful people are and the surprises that perhaps lymphoma can bring to our lives, as hard as it may be. One thing is very important, and I think this is something, again, a bit more existential, and that is linking our illness to something meaningful. We all, for those of you that are here that are patients, this is a tough thing. It's a tough gig. And I think what's important is not to suffer in vain. And one can take the approach about, well, this is just bad luck. It's random. I'm one of these people that got lymphoma. The million people in the world that I saw a slide earlier, that I'm one of them. Well, every 2 hours, someone gets diagnosed. I was one of them. It's just bad luck. That is an approach, and I'm not saying what's right or wrong, but I'm offering another suggestion, and that is, what if you found some meaning for yourself in what this is about? And, perhaps it's, something more spiritual, or perhaps it's just because you feel you're going to be a better person, or you can have more gratitude for life or the people in your life. Maybe we take sometimes life for granted. I know I did. I'm so much more closer to my family than I ever have been. And I think perhaps, contemplating a little bit about some of the positives, because we can get so overwhelmed in all the stress of this illness that sometimes we forget about the real good stuff that can actually come out of it. So I'd like to encourage you to perhaps even talk to your carer, your partner, your family about the good stuff that actually have come out of it. Because often we just get so bombarded with all the bad stuff that we forget about the good stuff that lymphoma can actually bring to us, and there are many. I'm sure you all have amazing stories, and I wish we had more time to share, because if I had asked you what that is, I'm sure we'd hear amazing, enlightening, and inspirational stories. I'd like to end off by speaking about one aspect of stress, which for me probably was the most influential in managing my stress through this time. And you see there about making the present moment your focus. Stress is a function of time. In the moment, there isn't any stress. In fact, I'd like you to do a little experiment with me. I'd like you to put your pens and papers down and whatever. I just want you to totally focus on me now. Just get all your focus on me. Look at me, my body language, the accent, the whole thing. Just be totally one. Just be totally present with me right now. Stop. Where was your stress? It wasn't there. It doesn't mean that it almost disappeared. It didn't disappear. What you just did there, what you experienced there right now, was the fact that when you are present with something, stress cannot enter your body. Remember, stress is a feeling. We don't say I'm thinking stressed, we say I'm feeling stressed. You cannot feel stressed when you're in the moment with anything. And the affirmation or the focus here is be present to that which is present. So if you're sending an email, send an email. If you're talking to somebody, talk to somebody. If you're driving, drive. If you're eating, eat. And it might seem very simplistic, but you'll see how often your mind will take you away from what you're doing, and it will project you into the future event. Right now, you may be thinking what's for dinner, you might be thinking of a stressor, you might be thinking all sorts of things. So your mind will automatically go either to a future uncertain, often threatening event, or it can certainly go to the past, and you can lament about the past and really get quite captured by what happened in the past. And that's where stress can flourish. Stress cannot flourish, cannot exist in the moment. So when you're feeling stressed, what I'd like you to think about is, where's my mind? It's not going to be here, whatever you are. It's going to be either in the past or it's going to be in the future. What's important then is simply bring your mind back to whatever you're doing. Be present to that which is present. And as God made little apples, your mind will take you out again. And all you just simply do is bring it back to what you're doing. And it seems very simplistic, but very difficult to do. I'm still trying to master this. I often find when I'm doing things, my mind wanders. And if I'm ever feeling stressed, I see where my mind's going. By the way, not all stress is bad. There's a concept called eustress, EU stress. And that's the good stress. That's the stuff that kind of gets you going, a bit more motivated to do things you probably wouldn't have done. It stretches you a little bit out your comfort zone. That's good stuff. So I like to point that out, because the stress word often has a negative connotation, but there are some good parts about feeling stressed as well. The problem is when stress becomes out of control and is not very constructive. So my final note to you is, be mindful of where your mind is. Sometimes, if we leave it alone, it's like a boat with no oars. It'll eventually either hit a rock or go over a waterfall. Be mindful of how you're feeling, because how you're feeling most often is an indication of how you're thinking. Remember, if you're not feeling good, if you have any negative emotions are coming through, and again, we're not judging that as good or bad, but if you don't want to feel that, or you want to try and minimize your negative emotions, what's so important is to be mindful of what you're thinking. So if you're not feeling good, just stop for a moment and say, what am I thinking that's making me feel that way? And remember that if you're stressed, your mind is not on what you're doing, it's somewhere else. It's either in the past or it's in the future, and simply bring it back to what you're doing. I'd like to end off just by summarizing some of the key points we've spoken about today, and that if you want to transform our thought attacks by the red card, try and find a new interpretation of the way that you are looking at something. Try and find some meaning. Try and find some benefits or opportunity in the situation that you're in, even though it's really less than ideal. And thinking about lymphoma in a positive way, by trying to find some meaning. What positives can come out of it? And there always is, if we're happy to take the time to actually look at that. And the last point is the point I've just discussed, is when focusing on the now, you will always keep stress at bay. I thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
Meiron, that was wonderful. Thank you. That was a great insight. And I'm wondering if anyone would like to ask Meiron a question or a comment.
This is the time when it gets a bit stressful.
Yeah, very.
I always think, why worry over something you've got no control over? And you just got all these thoughts about what someone's doing, what you've got to do. It just happens.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think what's so important about stress management is to know what you can and can't control. If you can't control something, why worry about it? Because you can't control it anyway. And it's a really, really great insight.
You also get stressed as one sort of subject and will as another subject.
So can you repeat that?
Where you got stress as one thing, then you got will
Mm-hmm.
to do something. Where stress is sort of, what am I going to do? Well, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Well, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'll let it go with it anyway. So from stress to turn into a will.
Sure. Okay, so the gentleman was saying here you could turn stress into a will. It's really good. I think there's two aspects over here. The first question is, can I control this or not? If you can't control it, let it go and accept it because you can't control it anyway. Trying to control what you can't control leads to further stress. If you can control it, then the question is exactly right. What can I do? What action can I take that can try and help me progress to the level that I want it to be at? And absolutely right. You know, taking action, feeling that you're doing something, so long as that is something that you can control, is most definitely we feel more in control about taking that action, for sure. Sure. Anybody else? Okay.
How do you de-stress people around you if you're not stressed? Worried that I'm not stressed?
Yeah.
Other people are stressed?
Okay. So how you de-stress people around you was the question. It's a great question. I think what's important is not to tell them how stressed they are. What I think is important really is to perhaps share maybe some ideas that we spoke about today around, you know, understanding really what's behind their stress, and you'll find that there is a particular mindset, a particular interpretation that they're having that's leading them to feel that way, and how you can enable them to de-stress a little is to perhaps offer a different explanation, a different interpretation, yeah? So if I've got a few red cards in my bag. If you want to take a red card and do that, I think please don't go to someone and say, I'm going to red card you now, okay? Because that can certainly lead to some wars. So we're going to use it for good, not for evil. But I think what's important there is perhaps just share another interpretation. Because remember, thoughts create feelings.
They did buy me a Red Baron acrobatic.
Right. Yeah. Does that help you with your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Good. Anybody else? Okay, well, you're more than welcome to chat with me at tea, and if you want to grab one of those red cards, as long as you promise to use it for good, you're more than welcome.
Thanks, Meiron. We'll be handing out red cards a little bit after the end of the meeting, but it's really time to wind up. This has been a unique afternoon and a unique occasion. We've been privileged to have some wonderful speakers, including our international speaker, Professor Freundschuh, who's had to depart, unfortunately. But it really just remains to thank our speakers, but in particular to thank Sharon Millman. Sharon is the driving force behind Lymphoma Australia. She's got an extraordinary amount of energy and determination, and she has put this event together, as she has done a number of times in the past for other different types of events. So I think we should thank Sharon and acknowledge for her contribution, and she'd like to say a few words in closing, and I'm going to let her do that now. Thank you. Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you, Mark. Your words are too kind. But I'd just like to say on behalf of Lymphoma Australia and the ALLG, thank you very much to our panel of speakers, because without the time and effort that they have put into today, we certainly wouldn't be able to bring this information to you. It's all voluntary what they do, and it's just been amazing that they've been able to give us this extra information. For my own part, I became involved with Lymphoma Australia as a carer of a lymphoma patient, and I found information days like this so invaluable. It might not give you all the answers on your journey just right now, but it does give you the information to maybe make more informed decisions as you go along. And I think also as a patient group and also as a family or a carer of a lymphoma patient, these days reinforce the fact that you've done everything you possibly can. So we quite often have patients saying to us, it's not that we're doubting what's happened, we just want to make sure that we've left no stone unturned. So days like today, the information gap hopefully that will give you that reassurance so that you've got the power to actually have some input into the lymphoma journeys ahead. So today was our first one. I'm sure there'll be lessons to be learned from this. To our online community of lymphoma patients, carers and clinical staff, please let us know what we need to help you out with for next time. It really is our aim to make sure these types of days will touch anyone regardless of where they are living, because everybody is entitled to this sort of information. Thank you so much for being so patient and sitting in your chairs all afternoon, because we weren't going to let you go, because then the online people would be just looking at an empty room. So next time we have it, hopefully we'll be able to go a little bit more into specifics with subtypes and that sort of thing. But otherwise, please give us your feedback. We'll send out a online monkey survey so that we can actually gather all that information from you as well. So again, thank you very much, and thank you very much to our panel of speakers.